Hello and welcome to, well, I don't really want to call this a how I paint things, but kind of is. I'll explain. Now, I was waiting on a delivery of primers to be able to finish off Saruman this week. And I'm looking at it that, though it is now May, this is the end of the week which would end off April. So I wanted to cap off April with something cool, and having done a couple of the Isengard things already, Saruman seemed like the thing to do. But I forgot that May Day is a public holiday here in Germany. So instead, I found myself stuck without something to do because I was waiting on primers to arrive. Uh-oh. So what I did was dig out this 8th Army officer from Warlord Games. Now he is for bolt action, but of course, World War II gaming, there are a bunch of rule sets out there, and the historical paint sets from Army Painter. Now, what I wanted to get onto here was the idea that sometimes it's worth mucking around. Not necessarily wasting time, but anytime you are pushing paint around a miniature, you are learning something. So, though I have painted this fella, I think this is the 3rd version of this miniature I've painted, and I've done 8th Army on the channel before, I wanted to do it slightly differently, and I wanted to experiment. So, if you are interested in how I painted this particular fella, cool, that's what's going to be the focus of today. But it is all a bit experimental, and I'm really putting it up because it's a little bit of hobby time for me, which maybe you'll find it interesting. I had a great time, and I'm really happy with the results. So, as always, all of the paints will be listed in the description below. It's quite an intro, that one. Let's get started. Now, before I even primed this fella, as well as buffing off all of the mold lines along the outside of his sleeve and his legs and what have you with a file, I also came in with some fine grit sandpaper. I think it's 1400 grit or something like that. And I spent a little bit of time really smoothing them out. So I think this might be the most well-prepared metal miniature that I've painted in years. I'm really looking forward to getting into it. I then primed him with a spray of skeleton bone from the Army Painter. Any light, slightly bone color, so wraith bone from Citadel, for example, would also work quite well here. Skeleton bone's super useful if you want to speed paint a British desert army because it's pretty close to the khaki drill color, but I want to do a little bit more, of course. The officers, I reckon, he's probably got somebody looking after his kit. Now, because I have done similar miniatures fairly regularly, I am going to pop through the colors fairly quickly, but I did want to start by calling out here, this is Ruddy Umber from the Army Painter. And if you remember Tanned Flesh, and I loved Tanned Flesh, it was one of my favorite base colors. And when they swapped to the Fnatic line, suddenly no more Tanned Flesh. But this is about as close as you'll get. It's actually not from the Flesh line at all, but it is pretty much Tanned Flesh, maybe just a little bit lighter, and that genuinely suits me down to the ground. So if you're looking for a replacement, Moonstone Flesh and what have you, they're quite close. But Ruddy Umber here, this is my bet for that replacement. Now from there we're going to go straight to painting his hair and mustache, because this is where I'm likely to make a bit of a mess. And particularly, with his hair, I'll be able to tidy up by painting the hat color over the top. Now strap grey here, this one's from the German historical set. But, when these come along individually, my goodness, this one gets a huge vote from me. I always joke about how much I love, various shades of grey, and you can never have too many of them. Now, it occurs to me, I probably should have done this step before applying that strap black. What I'm going to try and do, and it's a little tricky on camera here, is get some matte white and just paint a line across the eyeballs, and I think I've got the bottom of his... Oh yeah, that's his socket, that's not his eye at all. Oh well, the point here is we can be relatively messy. Now once you've got the absolute clown shoes look down, what you can do is grab your strap grey again, and what I'm going to try and do is just paint a little vertical line. I am going to do this off camera actually, but the premise is sound. Goodness gracious me, that looks dreadful. But what we'll do now is go back to our Ruddy Umber, and this is a little bit easier, just tidying up around the socket. This will probably be easier if you used a smaller brush than a regiment brush as well, but I like to do things the hard way. Now that's about as close as I think I'm going to get it. It is worth pointing out, of course, that we've got to shade this yet, so that'll probably help a little. And as well, this fella's normally going to be viewed from one direction, so if his eyes don't quite meet up, I can blame that on the sculpt. Anyhow, we're going to move on now and paint the khaki drill, and for this I'm going to use light battle dress. Now on the bottles, battle dress is popped down as 2 words. And folks are going to point out probably that that is technically incorrect for British battle dress. There was a huge amount of American-produced battle dress, which was a little more brown, made in a very similar cut. So in most miniatures, you can just paint it to mark the difference. But the name of it was listed as battle dress, 2 words. Now, most of that went to the Mediterranean theatre, if I'm remembering correctly, but you know, a decent portion of it would have ended up all the way across the British supply line. So somebody ever says to you, oh, your uniform's not quite the correct color, you know, it's a little bit too brown or a little bit too whatever, you can just say, yeah, it's US War Aid. So you'll probably see what I mean about the skeleton bone being relatively close to the battle dress. Battle dress is a little bit less warm, and once we're finished shading and doing all of our other steps over the top, it's going to look a little bit more unique. But for now, done. Now real quick, to paint his jumper, ordinarily, dark battle dress, well, perfect. There's your base color for a British uniform. Mid battle dress is going to work as your highlight, but I want a slightly more faded appearance to the woolen jumper. So what I'm going to do is just mix a couple of these together. Half and half, pop them on my palette, and I'll get the in-between. Now you will probably find, this being a slightly darker color, that you'll want to apply 2 coats of this over your skeleton bone. So I'm making sure, try and avoid the collar that I have already painted with the khaki drill color. But yeah, away we go, painting in the jumper. Then let's say, for argument, he's been in theatre for a little while and his hat's gotten a bit lighter, so we'll just use mid battle dress for that. Obviously on this chap there isn't a huge amount of webbing to paint. And while you could use webbing khaki, what I'm actually going to use here is canvas from the American set. And the reason being here is that I was looking up uniform details for the 2nd New Zealand Division, and the Combat Chronicle of the DivCav, the Divisional Cavalry, mentions how they would regularly salt and scrub their webbing back to raw canvas. They didn't actually blanco them. So what I want is, well, a pale off-white canvas color. And wouldn't you know it, but canvas is perfect. And I'll take my time here, and I'll also try and tickle in the lanyard with this. Well, I've still got my battle dress color on my palette to tidy this up if I make a mistake. What I'm going to turn to here is Dryad Brown, there we go, to paint in the leather strap on his cap. I'll do a tiny little blip of gunmetal on the badge there, and I'm doing this now because this is where I'm likely to make a mistake. Now for his pipe, of course, there isn't really a correct color, so I'm going to use here oak brown, a nice deep polished brown. It'll look lovely. And then finally comes the fun part. Grab a little bit of matte white, and I'm going to paint in his enamel mug. This will be easiest. You just paint it in short little stripes, running down the surface of it for most of it. And bear in mind, don't overload it. You'll need to come back and give this a second thin coat. And then around the rim, we're going to paint a little bit of Baron blue. Now alpha blue is probably closer to accurate, but on something of this size, the true color is going to look quite dark, especially right next to a big thing of white like this. So I'm going to use the lighter color, and when we wash the miniature, it's going to look a bit more reasonable. Bearing in mind, I can also tidy up with the white if I need to. Once you've finished any tidy up that you need to do, it's time to go ahead and wash them. So what I've got here is actually a mix. I've popped in my little well over here, equal parts of strong tone, soft tone, and speed paint medium. Reason being, I want this to flow quite smoothly. I don't want it to be quite as dark as just straight strong tone would be, but I don't want it to be quite as yellow as soft tone would be. So a mix of each is going to work perfectly. The medium is there to stop things from staining quite so heavily on any flat areas. You'll see I am going over the entire miniature with this mix. So, mind how you go. You don't want to completely drench them. And any big clumps, like in his arm socket here, just try and shift that away. While it's still wet, just wick it out with your brush and shift it somewhere where you're going to use it. So let's douse this fella in our little shade mix, then give him somewhere warm to dry. And then we should end up with something like this. Plenty of definition, and it hasn't stained the colors too much. The lighter colors, like the khaki drill, are going to need touching up. So I am going to go over all of the uniform colors. So his trousers, his jumper, and his hat with the base colors again. But what I'm going to do is let's get some of that off my brush. Avoid the recesses so that shading stays intact. Now, this won't take terribly long, and it's relatively easy. It's a good skill to practice because it's a really easy way to spend a bit of time on a single miniature practicing your brush control. So the way I'm going to go, most of this is going to be khaki drill, or rather light battle dress. And same too, the one exception is that his jumper I'm just going to highlight with mid battle dress. Now from behind you'll see on his jumper that looks a little bit more reasonable. A bit of depth there, and the color spot on. So what I'm going to do now is I have mixed up on my palette here. This is half and half mid battle dress and light battle dress. And this is pretty much a perfect highlight. So what I'm going to do now is start using this to accentuate hard edges, extreme creases, and what have you. Now on his jumper, we've added a bit of texture there, and on his cap as well, we've done the same thing. But what I'm going to do now is, if you see over on my palette there, I've got a little bit more of the light battle dress. I'm just going to get some on my brush and start working it into sort of the edge of my little puddle of highlight. And then once I'm satisfied with the color, I'm going to come back and do just a few little more scratchy highlights. This time I want to be quite sparing, but I quite like these last few very pale highlights on things like wool. It works super well on these jumpers. So again, this is in the realm of something that I'm not going to do on every single miniature in an army, but I am painting an officer, so let's have some fun. Now for his trousers, I've mixed in a little bit of brain matter beige to the light battle dress. And now I'm going to do the same thing of just a few sharp lines to accentuate those final creases in the trousers. Now off screen, I have quickly hit him with a little bit of white and some Baron blue again to tidy up his mug. What I'm going to do now is move on to highlighting his skin. And here I'm starting, this is agate skin. What I want to do is to cover over most of his face, his hands, and what have you with this. And we'll leave just a little bit of the shaded stuff in the recesses. See, I've already hit his mustache there. This is way easier when you don't have a camera in your way. Now with barbarian flesh, this is where we're going to add a little bit more definition to his face. What we're concentrating on now is things like his nose, his cheekbones, and his chin. You'll see particularly his bottom lip, I've actually left that in the color that it was when we had finished shading, because it's a nice quick color and will work just fine. So backs of his knuckles as well. Now the final stage on his face and hands is going to be just a little bit of Dorado flesh. And when I say a little bit, that's all I've got on my brush. The trick here is in making sure that it's thin enough to flow off the brush easily, but that you haven't got so much on your brush that you lose control of it when you touch the miniature, because paint does like to flow. So I'm going to concentrate on the tip of his nose, for example, on the very edge of his cheekbone there. Don't forget he's got ears, and a little bit on his chin. Once I'm finished with this, what I'm going to do, go ahead and varnish him. And yeah, let's get a look at this fella. He's got his base on, and he is ready to hit the table. And so, there at last, our 8th Army officer is complete. Although he could just as easily be serving in the Mediterranean, the uniform went around a few places. Now, he was a lot of fun to paint, and like I said at the beginning, it is worth mucking around sometimes. Grabbing a miniature that you do want to paint and experimenting with them. I'm more than happy to put that in my collection. He'll go on the table and hopefully lead some of my bolt-action armies to victory, but we'll see how that pans out. I have to admit, I've never really been very good at the gaming side of things, so it's important that my armies look nice. So as always, thank you very much goes to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my producers who are showing up on screen now. You folks are the ones who are keeping this mess rolling, so thank you very much. I mean it every time. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.